This is episode 9.
Yeah, I don't think they're...
Are you sure?
Oh my god, are you freaking serious? I was just about to say, I don't think there's going to be an argument about it this time.
I just wanted to test the waters. It was a good way to get this started. It is episode 9. We are back for our second discussion of Bluebeard, and our new guest from last week is also back, but has it lost its luster?
Yeah, it has. I'm not as excited.
Can confirm.
Has the newness of this human being lost its luster? Damn it. Probably.
We've already moved on to scheduling a different special guest.
It's fine.
So
Old news.
It's fine.
We're glad you're back.
Thanks, friends. Feels good to be back.
Just to make sure that is on record. We're good to go there. So we're just gonna go around as we have done previously, and we're going to first off introduce ourselves and say what we're drinking. We'll start with our new guest. 'Cause we didn't do that last time.
What an opportunity to bring back some luster.
Yeah, go for it.
Hell yeah. I don't even know. I need to find what this is called.
Oh, it's the Hemperor.
Okay, the Hemperor by New Belgium is what I'm drinking, because apparently I'm the person who just drinks the weed beers now. But this one, I think, doesn't really taste... I think it tastes like a beer, but smells a little bit like weed, which is kind of similar to the last one.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, after
fine.
trying the last one and having a sip of yours, I think it smells less like it, but tastes more like it.
All I'm saying is, I feel like if this was in a bottle that did not mention weed, you would not be like, that smells like weed, because IPAs just smell like weed.
I
think it
disagree with
specifically
that.
smells like
It's
weed.
like a sourness, I
can
suppose.
smell it from here. I want you to know that.
I don't believe it. I just think, like, I've done it, but Corona too. Corona smells like weed. That is not... oh, man, we need to get a Corona next week.
I don't drink Corona. So
Me either, but I know it smells like weed. But the point is, it's fine. It's a fine beer, and I'm Andrew.
It was from the... Tangent first. Name second.
I'm Danny. I'm drinking the Oberon Ale from Bell's Brewery in Michigan.
Which I've never had Bell's. I hadn't even heard of it. I just think that now that I'm doing the choose your own 6-pack, I'm choosing like things that I just would never ever grab.
You gotta grab the weird one.
I chose it because it's not an IPA and it has a pretty picture of a sun on it.
Hell yeah, it does.
That's how I pick my beer.
Yeah.
Cute.
I'm Brian, and this week I have Avery Brewing. It's in Boulder, Colorado. It's Ellie's Brown.
Ellie's Brown.
It's got a picture of a dog on it.
It does have a picture of a very cute dog.
And this was the beer that was on the 6-pack, because I said last week that I've been choosing, if the 6-pack box has a specific beer on it, I gotta grab that one. And so this one says it's loyal, friendly, and mellow.
Nice.
So nice. So nice.
I'm Jamie. Hi. I'm drinking Boulevard Easy Sport, which is a recreation ale. It says it's clean, balanced, and tangy. And I would call it a sophisticated Bud Light.
Can you taste... Didn't it say there were like tangerine and sea salt or something?
Yes.
Goofy? Can you taste that, or is it Bud Light?
It tastes like a nice Bud Light.
All right.
I would agree.
I would say. Like it's good. I like it a lot better than Bud Light. You want to taste it?
Yeah, I actually do.
Oh, on air.
On air.
I had it at Boulevard a few weeks ago, and I...
Ooh, I get some tangerine. That's pretty good. I do, though. Yeah.
Some ASMR for you
Oh
folks.
my God. That
Listening at home.
That slurp when you listen back
like
to that, you
there's
guys.
a hint of citrus.
I'd say so. I like it.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, I really don't mind it. After having had it, I thought it was pretty good.
Isn't it only like 4 ABV, though? Not that's
4.1.
Okay.
Wheat
we're
is
here.
just 4.4.
Yeah,
though.
we looked that up.
Okay.
Boulevard Wheat's only 4.4.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't drink Boulevard for that reason as well, though.
Yeah.
But hey.
You're a dummy.
I guess so.
So anyway, that was our longest What Are You Drinking segment.
This has been Beer Corner.
Beer time with books, fair enough. We're also going to, as we have previously done, go around and talking about some media we've been consuming recently since the last episode.
I actually, to clarify from last week, I said wrong things about Tuca and Birdie. They're not fish, surprisingly enough, because they're called Tuca and Birdie, so they're birds. And you don't even watch the show and you knew that.
But I know.
I know, like I'm stupid is what I'm getting at. Like, yeah. So it's a toucan and it's a bird.
You don't even watch
which
the
is
show.
probably a swallow, potentially.
And a birdie.
Yeah, but I don't know what the birdie, like, Because I know toucan is a toucan.
What's that word where the word sounds like it sounds like birdie, but it's spelled Bertie.
But it is just spelled Birdie.
Oh,
for the
never
record.
mind.
Yeah.
Never mind.
So
I think it
should have been even easier.
Yeah, I know. It literally was just like right in front of my face, and I said that they were fish, but they're not. And that show is interesting. It's BoJack Horseman-y, like I said last time. I've watched like 6 more episodes just to like see what's up. And I think I'll keep watching it. It's funny. It is weird. Like weird shit happens, and you just kind of are like, is this a joke, or are they gonna like keep doing this? And they just like continue on with like something that doesn't make any logical sense at all. You'll have to watch it. It's also like really good like the 2 leads are both females, so it's like hella like female activism stuff. Like here's an inconvenient situation where I had a plumber come over and it makes me feel awkward, and it really like highlights a lot of that stuff. So when you're a privileged bitch like us white cis males, you actually, learn some stuff. So
Woo!
That's all I got. I've done nothing but watch Toucan Birdie.
Are we allowed to talk about other books we're reading in this
That's
section?
media.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought so, but I don't remember if we
I was going
done
to
that.
for mine.
Oh, I was going to also.
Nice.
I have been last night I watched 6 episodes of 10 episodes of the Netflix show called Dead to Me with Christina Applegate, and I didn't think I was gonna like it that much, but it's kind of dark and a little twisted, and I like it. And I'm reading a book by Donna Tartt called
A Secret History?
Thank you.
That's the one you took from me.
It's Jamie's book.
We creeped on your Goodreads today on accident. We were at
I've been getting good reading time in.
Nomads.
So that brings up 2 books. I'm reading A Secret History by Donna Tartt, and I'm also reading a book by Rebecca Traister called All the Single Ladies, which is about like the rise of singledom in America, and how I think the subtitle is The Rise of an Independent Nation. And I am enjoying both a lot. I read The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, and I liked it. A Secret History is a lot different, and it's super weird. There's an orgy at the beginning, and that basically is the whole and it basically is like the foundation for the whole book. Something terrible happens, and then like 500 pages later, they're still dealing with it. So I would recommend it.
Nice.
And
It's nice.
that's what I've been doing.
Cool.
Hell yeah.
I'll hit a couple briefly here. I've been continuing Time Crisis. The interesting thing about Time Crisis now is that because it's it's every 2 weeks, it's also like way back in history, like way back. It's 2016 right now, and they're in the midst of the election, and it's so interesting to hear them all talk about it without knowing what happens.
Oh God.
I'm just like,
you
sweet summer children.
Sweet baby angel children.
But it's just other, current events. Like the Olympics, for instance, over the summer. That was interesting to like revisit that in a different light and just hear all these points that at the time were like big news things that ended up not being consequential to anything. Right. You know what I mean? Because like people always want to find sensationalism in whatever's happening currently. So that's pretty interesting, and the show's still good. Also, as far as books go, I started the George R.R. Martin Game of Thrones series. That's technically, I guess, a prequel, but I have to pronounce this correctly because every time I do it too quickly, it sounds like something else.
Dunkin'
But it's
Donuts.
Dunkin' Donuts. It's Tales of Dunk and Egg. And I keep saying it fast. I'm like, Tales of Dunk and Egg, and I was like, Dunk and Egg.
Tales of Dunkin' Donuts.
What's that?
Specifically, he keeps just saying to me, "Oh, I was reading Dunkin' Egg," and I'm like, "What are you saying?"
Reading Dunk and Egg, dude.
Wait, so are these a spin? What's the?
So it's pretty interesting. It's 90 years before the first book, and it's about Sir Duncan the Tall, who is a hedge knight, which means that at the beginning he's not pledged to any house. And the egg of the story. So that's Dunk. It's Sir Duncan. Then Egg is Aegon Targaryen.
Oh.
And he is in line for the throne, and so he is Sir Duncan's squire, and just kind of follows along. I've done one of the 3. He's written 3 of these short stories. They were compiled into one unit in 2015, but the first one he wrote was back in the 90s, so it's been along the way, and it's pretty interesting. It's like George R. R. Martin's writing, and it's really good. So
is that what the like the rumored prequels are going
I
to
hope
be
so.
about?
In all honesty,
Like,
because
cinema?
I've liked him so much, I hope that it is, because some of the other ones that I heard is like the Adventures of Arya. Like, I don't really want that, so.
Screw Arya.
So I would hope that like
Wow.
Duncan Egg would be a cool
I
one.
love Arya.
I love Arya too. I just don't know that I
He
want.
doesn't like Arya.
I don't know that I want.
Brian hates feminists.
I don't want Arya just riding on a ship out to west of
You need to watch
Westeros
Tuca
when
and Birdie.
Bran can just tell them by like warging into some birds and being like,
Well, but
"I'll tell you
wait,
what's
I
over
thought
there."
they were prequels though.
Well,
I heard they
they
were
just
gonna
said
be
spin-offs.
I thought they were gonna be prequels.
They were. I actually read a story that they were considering an Arya story, and they were like, "Well, we're not going to do that." So
Okay.
anyway, and then the last one we watched the first episode of Chernobyl, which was crazy. But I won't get into that because I haven't seen it that much. I don't know that much about Chernobyl itself. Just that it was awful, and it was something that had to do with
It's
a
very
nuclear
bad.
Brian teaches
nuclear
history.
power plant.
It
2019.
was awful.
It's real bad.
So anyway, those are mine. Just want to hit those real quick.
Yeah, I also have seen the first episode of Chernobyl because Brian and I are married. Spoilers.
Yeah.
Thanks for the hype, everybody.
Hey, cheers.
Marriage.
On occasion.
But let's see other things in my life. So, as our loyal listeners know, I'm a high school English teacher, and it is the end of the year. I'm still in school somehow, even though it's June, because
That is wild.
we had 11 snow days this year. So I'm still there, but I only have 2 days left. So,
Woo.
as a
So it might be a 2-beer night, baby.
An
What a
update
day.
on teaching high schoolers. They just read Othello. My sophomores read Othello, but because it was the end of the school year and we only had like 2 weeks, we read the translated version in modern English, which was funny. And then my juniors just read A Streetcar Named Desire, which is one of my favorite plays. And my juniors this year enjoyed it a lot more than my juniors did last year. But then it got to the end and they were all mad at me. So I don't know. But also related to that, media that I've consumed very recently. It's the end of the year and my kids already took their finals because it's June. And so the last 3 days, I'm just showing movies because I'm that teacher right now. And that's fine. Everybody's fine with it. But a movie that I watched on Friday that I bought on Amazon specifically for classes on Friday, but I had not seen previously was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah, I see that getting.
I want to see that
It's
so
so
badly.
good.
Is it really? I've seen
It's
on Reddit
so
so
good.
many posts about it, like unbelievable.
Is that where there's is that the one where there's lots of Spider-Men?
Yeah, it's like animated. There's like 8 Spider-Men.
Lots
Right.
of
Spider-Man.
Everyone's laughing at that.
Just
Anyone with Spider-Man?
no one's used to Spider-Man.
I know, it's true. It's true.
Spider-Man.
There's
No,
also
it's fair. It is.
Spider-Women. Would you say
Oh.
Spider-Mans?
Oh, I don't know.
I would say.
I was expecting a resounding no.
I don't know because it's like a
Spider-Man's-
proper. It's
Neither.
like a proper.
Stop
I know,
considering
right?
it. I'm yelling.
Okay.
I'm screaming.
Anyway.
Um,
No, we
There's-
want it.
There's
Clip,
more
clip,
than,
clip.
There's more than one Spider-Man. But it's really good. Like I had heard it was really good. I'd like heard reviews and seen things
Yeah,
on Twitter.
like a lot.
And I was like, I'm sure this will be fine. I don't watch a lot of superhero movies. And I cried.
What?
I cried.
Wow.
She texted me.
Is it a movie
She
or is it
texted
a
me during the
show? It's a
day.
movie.
Yeah.
God,
She texted me. She's like, "It is so good," and she told me that
That's
she
wild.
cried and everything. And I was like, I was upset because I was like, I wanted to watch that
It's
together.
the
It's fair
best.
enough. The
Watch
kids.
it
It's for the
together.
kids.
That's
But
It's
I've
the
heard
best Spider-Man movie I've ever
from
seen.
a lot
Really?
of comic book crazy people. They've been like, this is the best Spider-Man movie, like all considered.
Better than the Tobey Maguire ones.
Believe
It's hard
it
to
or not.
believe. It's hard to believe.
What?
But it is. Apparently. I want to see
Yeah.
it. It's
I
coming to Netflix
it's
soon, or if
so
not
good.
already on
Oh,
there.
is it?
Yeah.
It's
I've
real
been waiting
good.
for that to
Yeah.
watch it, for it to come to like Netflix or Hulu or something.
Yeah. So
I also own it on
Okay.
Amazon if you want to steal
shut
it.
come
Yeah,
over
that-
before it comes in the next
Yeah.
3 days or so.
Check it out.
It's great.
Cool. Well, that's a pretty good roundup. We've had a hearty dose of both of those segments.
That's true, man.
But for today, to get into the meat of the episode, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the second half of our discussions on Bluebeard. And it's pretty interesting revisiting this, considering what we talked about last week as far as how we thought the book was going to end and everything else, and what was going to be in the potato barn.
Yeah.
Like just seeing what the predictions were and what it actually ended up being was pretty fascinating. But we will get to that in a little bit. Before we get too deep in discussions, does anyone want to summarize a little bit about the back half?
I'll give it a go.
Okay.
You guys will help me.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
You will help me.
So
we all just looked at Andrew.
You? All right. Yeah. But I'll give him my best shot. So basically, Raybo is continuing his autobiography / diary accidentally, and there's obviously the separate stories all wrap up. And kind of just the Dan Gregory and Marilee bit just kind of turns into just Raybo kind of talking about Marilee because the two of them went to a place that Dan Gregory told them not to, being the natural, what is it?
Museum of Modern Art.
The Museum of Modern Art. And not the bedroom.
Yeah, and not the bedroom. But then they all...
Eventually
the bedroom.
Okay,
But
guys,
they
I'm
don't.
telling the story,
They
all right?
literally don't go to a bedroom.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
they don't. But so that goes on. They get caught doing that. Dan Gregory's not a fan. Then it kind of just talks about how the two of them.
They get horned
Yeah,
up.
they get pretty excited with each other, and they do the thing with each other, which has been talked about multiple times.
Yeah.
We saw it coming.
We
Right.
knew it was gonna happen.
But that happened.
Not in a bed, on a couch.
Yeah, which is
Danny.
wild.
Okay.
Crazy.
We're focusing so much on this
I know.
bang.
One bang
On this.
on this bang.
It's an important.
No, it's
It
true.
is.
It's true, yeah.
One of the more literary, important bangs in literary.
Yeah,
It's
I'd say so.
true.
No, it couldn't have been said better, I don't think. So that goes on, and then he kind of continues to talk about Marilee and him and their relationship and how eventually they get back together. And Marilee is surprisingly different than I thought she was going to be in Italy. I thought she was going to be
when
nice
he
to him,
revisited her. Yeah,
but she kind of just raked him over the coals for not hitting her up afterwards after the bang. So, but then swaps into like, let's be kind of friends, I guess. So that kind of wraps.
Also, Marilee, I love Marilee's character there at the end also because she's like so about women.
yeah,
and
queen
I
of her
love
domain.
it.
Yeah,
It's true.
She has rid her life of all men. She has all the servants that work for her are women who have been hurt by men. She just seems very bitter,
She
and I
is
love it.
stacking
Yeah.
her life.
Yeah,
She sure is.
with
I
women.
love that.
Yeah. So that is the kind of Marilee that Raybo runs into. A very confident, very like, screw you if you're involved in ruining my life any more than you already have by not ever hanging out with me.
but it gets rectified, which
does.
is nice. That she makes him feel like she had always felt within like a small window.
Yep.
And then after that, it's like, okay, now we can be equals. Let's talk as friends, which I thought was a cool thing.
Right, I thought so too. It was a very mature thing because she was like, all right, now that I've
Yeah,
railed
now
you,
that-
we can maybe be pals. Like,
Let's be buds.
Yeah.
But then she's like, stop mentioning sex. 'cause
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not-
Yeah, it's
I
not
know.
happening.
That was
It's
so
not on the table.
good because explicitly he
Or the
said,
couch.
Or the couch.
Explicitly he said, well, Marilee mentioned
Or
that
the
she's
bed.
not with anyone, so we're probably going to get some stuff
I'm
going.
probably gonna go
I'm
have
like,
the
the
best
first
sex in my
sentence
life again.
Marilee says is
See
like,
you
we're not
never.
having sex.
Which I also appreciate Raybo including that in his own autobiography
Yeah,
about
good
his
for
own
him.
foil of being like, I thought we were going to, then we weren't, and I got destroyed.
Yep.
It was
It
bad.
was very different than he thought it was going to be. So that's kind of that's kind of how that storyline wraps up with him and Berman, Cersei. Is that what we decided?
Cersei Berman.
Cersei is how the
Yeah,
pronunciation
that's
is.
how we're saying it.
Yeah, Cersei.
Great. So they eventually find out what's in the potato barn, surprisingly enough.
Yeah, and their conversations leading up to that are also really
Yeah.
awesome too. Like
Yeah.
his conversation with both Marilee and Cersei are really deep. Like they both get into like really deep parts of Raybo's psyche, and
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
and are we going to talk about the potato barn later? Or
yeah,
can
that's fine now.
Yeah, we can just stem this right into
Yeah.
let's just. But the potato barn ended up being 8 canvases that used to have paintings of Raybo's that all the paint fell off, and so we
Was that satin Duralux?
yeah, it was the
Sateen.
Duralux
Or
that
Sateen,
likes
yeah.
to fall off,
Duralux.
Yeah.
even though
Duralux, some kind of blue number 7. What it was
Oh.
called,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So that happens, and then all the paint falls off, and then he makes the canvases hella white again. And I thought that's how it was going to end for a minute, and I was not going to be stoked if he was like, then I made all my old canvases white. But it is a really fun story about how he got the canvases back, how he made them look nice, and then how he eventually decided to, because he locked up the barn at that point, was like, we're just done. Like, I tried, I failed. I think that was like, the title was very similar to that. I tried, I failed, let's do it again.
Or now it's your turn.
Yeah, and so instead he paints quite the scene, and Cersei and him get to kind of experience that together for the first time in a long time. And I think even for like Raybo, I'm sure that's the first time he's really just like analyzed his own painting that much.
Because he was kind of done with it.
Yeah. And
like he wanted it to be after he died.
Right.
Because he just didn't want to be around for anybody to analyze what he had done. And I thought that the build up to that reveal, especially because you brought up, it was a big point in the novel as well, but that he brings it back to the white canvases and that it started with that. It wasn't just from like point A to point B. It was like the build up to him eventually creating this masterwork,
which is
it was a perfectly done build up to that.
Yeah,
and it was such a relief to like see that it was something as amazing as it was.
And it totally like touched on all of like a lot of past things with Dan Gregory and how he had him paint a like photorealistic painting of the studio that he was in and how it got burnt. And it's just like, and how Dan Gregory is like, by the end of being underneath me, you'll know how everything works. You'll know the names of all the parts of everything that's in your painting, down to like the gun that's in the corner. Like, you'll know everything. And then you could see Cersei asking him questions about each individual character in this painting that had, what was it, over 1,000 people in it painted.
Yeah, so just to get to that really quickly, the painting is specifically set. It's in World War II,
right at the end of World War II.
And it's something that Raybo had already talked about previously, where he had been let go because he was a prisoner of war along with a bunch of other people, and he basically used that as a foundation to then paint on top of, and it was people that were all there, and then some. Because it started to touch on, like you said, with Dan Gregory and other people in his past. They all found their way into that painting, which was really cool.
Yeah, he painted himself in it because he was in that moment, but he also painted in Pollock and Terry Kitchen.
And Kitchens as well.
Who surprisingly enough were not there. So he got pretty excited about it. But it was, I felt satisfied for sure. That's what I'll say about the Potato Barn. I felt satisfied, and especially with how they delivered it, like you were saying, Brian. It was just like a great, like, still intertwining like the novel of.
Well, it just kept. It was a long period of the end of the novel where like it didn't feel like it was just like the curtain is pulled off, because he started to hint throughout the back half of the novel, because we really didn't get that much of a hint in the first half.
I think we got nothing other than the size.
Other than the size, which could have gone up to Jupiter. But the fact that like it did then have these little crumbs that led up to this thing, and again it was such a significant piece of work, was just again really well done. And I think the cool thing about it that it kind of does explicitly talk about it, but the thing that Raybo kept having such a problem with his own work was off of essentially like verbal abuse from Dan Gregory, saying you don't have any soul to your work because you're doing it too much, too realistic, like you're not feeling what you're doing. The fact that he was able to use his incredible talent of something that seemingly wouldn't have soul to then have over 1,000 souls. Like he had knowledge of the backstories of every single person on this painting, that his ability to then make something with that much soul was like, it was amazing.
It was very cool.
So good.
And then it does go on to talk about just like how his house became an attraction for people to come look at the painting in the Potato Barn and all his other painting collections that he has in his house and all that good stuff. Kind of forgot that it did even talk about post Potato Barn reveal.
And so for that, so now that we've gotten to the painting and kind of talked about it, there was one point that I thought that was kind of interesting, that we talked about last episode, that played into two camps here, is that we were saying, what's going to be in the Potato Barn, and is it going to be a joke in the end? And to some degree it sort of was by way of its title. Which, so in some ways it wasn't, because it was again like a very literal piece of art, and it was something that was very heartwarming, but also the title played into something that did kind of lead up into like a serious joke, I guess. So it kind of played into both. So what were your guys' thoughts when you heard the title? I can't remember exactly what it was. I don't think I have it marked specifically, but
Women, it's your turn now, or something like that. I don't think I have it marked.
Right at the end, isn't it?
No.
He reveals it a little bit at the beginning.
Last couple chapters. While you guys are looking for that, I had a moment that I wanted to talk about that backtracks a little bit, but you're talking about like the hints of what was in the potato barn. And I took a picture of a quote that I really liked that was maybe like 90 pages before we learned what's in the potato barn. And he's talking to Cersei and he's like, do you want to know what's in there? And she's like, yes. Oh my God. Tell me.
Oh my God.
And then he said,
classic Cersei.
Oh my God.
Yes, please.
He says, it's the emptiest and yet the fullest of all human messages. And she responds with, which is. And then
he just,
the sass.
And then Rabo says, goodbye. And I think that's kind of beautiful, but also with the painting, I think it fits really well. So I liked that hint. I was like, oh.
And we did just get the title of the painting. Danny, you found it.
Oh yeah, it's the women's turn.
So like to some degree, it was a joke in that like he's just playing on a lot of the horrific things that had caused a lot of grief for previous mentions of characters, primarily war. Was a lot of leaders that were primarily men, and that gets talked about of like in the past a lot of aggression has happened from like male leaders being aggressive,
and that's just like what you see from Dan Gregory, from,
right?
Everybody,
and so having it be that and that's what it's kind of signifying, and him having these revelations with these two main female characters that led him to be comfortable enough to even show that painting off in the first place. Like it was kind of a funny thing in a book where I didn't find there were a lot of overt jokes to me. Like I found that to be kind of a humorous thing, but also like a really powerful thing as well.
I also just I took a lot of pictures of Marilee specifically talking about women because like I said, I loved her and I thought she was really like dry and funny in how she talked about it. And I think that he puts that part about Marilee right before the moment where we learn what's in the potato barn with Cersei in like present day for a purpose, because I think he was inspired by Marilee in a lot of ways. But there's a quote where she said, women are so useless and unimaginative, aren't they? All they ever think of planting in the dirt is the seed of something beautiful or edible. The only missile they can ever think of throwing at anybody is a ball or a bridal bouquet.
So boring.
It's so boring. Because she's talking about how, like, this one servant's, like, leg was blown off because a man left a grenade on the ground or something. And just women are so boring and unimaginative. We just want things to be beautiful. Oh God. How dare we?
Good old Marilee. I did like her a lot. And I also liked how Rabo responded to it all. Because obviously it took time, but it made him a significantly better person who seemingly is much more in tune with his own emotions, but also is in tune with the fact that he is like confident in his ability to show Cersei the painting, and so that's what he did. But I think it was definitely part of
in his role as a useless white cis male,
like the rest of them were.
Yeah.
Like the rest of them.
I think that like it was surprising to see the turn of the back half of the novel be so female centric, because I don't think that it really seemed to play into that in the first half. Like a lot of those themes seem to present themselves a lot more just a lot later, and it's so interesting to have something that did end up being like almost a central theme of the male versus female archetypes and how females helped bring enlightenment to our main character, that it really wasn't talked about that much at the beginning, unless you guys can think of other hints. But like I thought that it was so interesting that was so leaned into so much more heavily in the back half.
Yeah, it was almost like split. I mean, it was almost like split right in half. Like the back half was very like Marilee and Cersei heavy. Like, and I also feel like I like the way that he talks about Cersei like coming in and kind of just taking over. Like, but he doesn't do it in a negative way.
Yeah.
Like he talks about her being like just, I don't know, controlling, but like not in a negative way. I feel like it's the way that some like women are described as, like just being super controlling and like type A. And he like he almost like reveres that in her. I feel like,
and but also like in the first half he didn't, because he was annoyed.
And that's what, in the second half I feel like he is almost like he's more appreciative or something.
Yeah, because she like, there are moments that are really subtle, but like he's like, oh yeah, she like moved some paintings out of the basement and put a pool table down there, and she just does that now, and like that's cool for her. Like he doesn't get mad about it.
Very matter of factly, just like, she did this thing. I'm probably not crazy about it, but hey, whatever.
Yeah. She likes to dance a lot. I don't really want to go dancing.
And I feel like, especially after like the repainting his entire home and moving around all that shit that like that made him lose his mind the first time, now he's like, oh, she just put in a pool table. We're good. You know.
That's fine. She's really good at pool.
Yeah, she's great at pool. But we did find out, I forgot about the whole drug thing with Cersei, where we found out that she just had like a medicine cabinet full of pills from her past. Was it relationships? People were pharmaceutical reps or something.
Her husband.
Her late husband was a
had
pharmaceutical
a bunch of
rep
drugs.
or something.
Had a bunch of drugs.
Well, that was the other
Which
focus.
that isn't addressed later.
I know,
Well,
yeah. It always it left me wondering, like, was that supposed to make me think that she was on drugs or just like was a drug addict this whole time?
Well,
that's kind of what I took it as.
Me too, because I don't know.
I would say the thing that I think it did semi get addressed in a couple of ways, in the fact that Raybo later on really highlights the fact of his realization that she is going through grief.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't that
That's
focused
true.
on
He
at the
does mention
beginning,
that.
and it was kind of like he knew it all along, but there was something going on with I can't remember the exact context, but he kind of was like, oh yeah, like she is going through significant grief, and like all of her actions can kind of play into the fact that, you know, she is handling this in ways that people would need to, which may be by coping with drugs or whatever else. And then the other part of it that may be like an unspoken remedy to it is that Cersei got what she was looking for, I suppose, with her relationship to Raybo, because the one powerful thing, and it brought it back to my mind from your quote about it, when he's talking about Cersei dancing, and, you know, he never does that, but when he talks about that to her after they look at Raybo's painting in the potato barn, it gets brought up, and she's like, we are dancing, even though they're just holding hands, and they're just kind of like sharing this moment of this humanity that, you know, this is Raybo's, you know, coping with grief was this painting, because that was a significant part of his past. You know, it was the same thing.
He called it post-coital.
But it was like such, you know, a resolution to that relationship.
Like a euphoria.
Yeah, and so it kind of seems like that may help her in her ability to cope with significant parts of grief, because the relationship starts with her like poking at Raybo's past grief. She doesn't know exactly what it was, but she does start out with like, how did your parents die? But like that explains so much more to her, and like she saw him being able to go through it in that way. So I think that kind of, to me, explained, you know, it brought some resolution to that part of the story, because it did come out really randomly and later, but I think that kind of, in my mind, made it make sense.
I think so too, and the two of them, how they end up and how they resolve, is almost like, it makes you be like, oh, I want that relationship in my life. Like I can imagine doing that and just like really having like a spiritual moment where I really show someone something so close to my heart as that was for Raybo, and then to like be well received, but also just to be reminded, like, you know, we're both going through stuff. We're both going through grief. We handle it in similar ways, like you said. I thought that was really, like, that was pretty dang fun to see.
It was a nice moment.
Yeah, it was.
He says before that like they weren't really friends. Like, as she was about to leave, he felt like kind of sad about it, but not really, because he was like, I'm glad to have my house back. But then he was like, but I think we were friends at the end, after I showed her the potato barn. because they had that moment together.
Yeah. So I do want to revisit one of these first points that I'm going to bring up as far as the tone feeling different in this novel in comparison to other Kurt Vonnegut novels. But one of the things that I want to talk about a little bit that kind of came up for me is like when I was reading this, we kind of brought it up last time. I think the word that I had said was this novel's a bit more sober. I think in getting to the end, I would want to reroute that into sincere. Like this novel is very sincere. And I think that there's something really interesting upon reaching a really random page. And I wish I could say what it was. I'm reading on a Kindle and I have a picture of like a percentage of something or other. But the reason that this sincerity is there is he brings up, Rabo does, but also, you know, you take into account Kurt Vonnegut as an author and themes that he visits in a lot of his novels. He brought up Dresden again specifically in this. And I think Rabo had a brief interaction with Dresden, and obviously in thinking
he says he was a prisoner of war like just south of Dresden or something like that.
And the backstory on Vonnegut is
Vonnegut was also a prisoner of war. You read about that in Slaughterhouse-Five because Slaughterhouse-Five is like partially autobiographical. But he was a young soldier that was in Dresden when it was bombed. And so and so a lot of what he writes about then, you know, a consistent theme of Kurt Vonnegut's novels is talking about World War II, and it's really interesting in this novel to talk about its sincerity and also Rabo's experiences and his ability to cope with it, and especially in looking at the fact that the subject matter of this book is art in particular. I think what kind of struck me, and we'll talk about, you know, our thoughts on the book overall, but like this was, to me, in a league of its own in Kurt Vonnegut's body of work, and part of it is that sincerity because it seems like he's so much more into this novel because he's talking about like the importance of art, how it helps you cope with horrific things in life, specifically World War II, and a lot of it comes into this really cathartic moment at the end that you don't really get in other Kurt Vonnegut novels, and in that the art itself was the cathartic thing, and the fact that, you know, he just continues to mention Dresden, even if it's not the main focus of the novel. It was obviously a huge thing for him because it was a horrific moment in his life, but he's able to use his novels to like make some sense of it, even if it's like in some other novels like The World Is Shit, and finding humor in it along the way. You know, this one just felt very different in that, you know, the art was the thing that helped make things okay in the way that it could. And so I just was curious on your thoughts on like if you found the sincerity of this or like what you thought about the tone of it itself, because that's just kind of my takeaway. But like, how do you think of it in comparison to like other Kurt Vonnegut novels, since we've all read multiple? I kept thinking about, as I was like in the last 30 pages or so, how we kept in the last episode, people were worried. The four of us were worried that it was going to end with like a punchline. Like you're going to open the potato barn and it's going to be some like goofy thing.
Like one potato?
Yeah. Like
I was fully expecting that still.
One potato.
Honestly, like a blank canvas sounded right to me.
Yeah.
And when they started
I'm with you.
mentioning
I know,
that,
me too.
I was like, it's going to be like a stupid blank canvas.
It's going to be a metaphor.
And whatever. Because like Vonnegut does that a lot. He does end with a punchline a lot, and I love those books, and I love his style, but there is something like really special about how we expected that and didn't get it.
It's crazy because like every other Vonnegut book, I feel like on purpose leaves you wanting so that you think about it and you think about the themes more, and you're just like, oh wow, so much more to be gleaned, you know, which is fine, but it was crazy.
It's fine.
This was straight up just like the most bow ending I've ever heard. Like, like every story came to a close, everything got figured out, and the last words were like just Cersei being like, hey Rabo, like pay attention to the fact that you just made something badass, like give yourself some credit. And he's like, and the last sentence is him, when he says meat, he's talking about like the hands that he's looking at, like his body creating something. But the last sentence, which is unbelievably bow ended, is oh happy meat, oh happy soul, oh happy Rabo Karabikian. And it's like, oh my God. Like that is the ending that you always kind of wanted elsewhere, but he really just like gives you
everybody's good.
Like a Vonnegut happy ending.
Yeah, it is wild. And especially since you're so used to not that.
Yeah.
I
think this would be a weird first Vonnegut.
I do too.
Yeah.
You'd get way more optimistic.
Well, and also like this one felt much less jaded and cynical and like biting.
Yeah.
Like there were some parts still
from other people though. It seemed it seemed that it was talking about that in context of other characters.
Yeah, Rabo I feel like was pretty earnest and like I don't know. It felt
he was a little cynical.
Like
I think at the end he changes a lot because
I'm remembering I think second half.
Right.
Because like first half Rabo is like I didn't never do shit as an artist. I'm a terrible husband and father.
I'm a terrible person.
He still thinks a lot of those things.
Yeah.
But I think that Cersei's reaction
his attitude
to his painting and then other people's reactions after that, he's like, oh, okay, I did something. Like
it feels, for lack of a better descriptor, like it feels like a happy ending in Vonnegut terms, and it also feels I don't know, I felt like it was a little less just like jaded and angry, but that's also like probably my like feelings about Vonnegut coming out.
What's crazy though is too that like there was a whole novel or like a whole story with Dan Gregory and Karabikian and how like there's this long tale about him and all this other stuff, but really even like if you're talking about just the one plot line where it's Rabo writing his autobiography, that only took 4 months. That's what he said at the end of the book, was that Cersei showed up and then she's leaving 4 months later, whatever. And so it's way more drastic when you think about like the current Rabo.
Yeah.
Like even at the beginning of the book, he had to get convinced to write his own autobiography, of which he started just being like, I'm a no good painter, but this lady told me to write this, so I suppose I will.
House.
And then at the end of the book, he's like, damn. Happy meat, happy hand, like whatever, which is just hilarious.
Happy
but it's
Rabo.
Like, it's so different, and that's 4 months, and like it's crazy how much Cersei did do to him, and how like introspective. Yeah, right. It's just like him writing this book like forced him to be.
Happy Rabo.
Exactly.
Also, it's funny just as a side thing in you talking about like his progression in him writing the book. He also seemed to become a better writer. I think, which is kind of interesting like in the back half.
You mentioned how he like, because he talks about the whole potato barn thing so well.
Well, even before when he's talking about like the interjections of Cersei, where it's like she's over my shoulder. Side note this, like side note that. Back to the present, but like toward the end there was less of that, and it seemed to be really focused in. So that's interesting to see like Rabo's not only like maturation as a person, but also like his ability to become a better writer, which is kind of cool too.
And you could just see that by looking at a page. Like early in the Bluebeard, there'd be like, because this whole book is riddled with little like ellipses bits in between paragraphs, like
classic Vonnegut.
Yeah, classic Vonnegut. But those get less and less, and especially in the last like 30 pages, you turn a page and it's just walls of text instead, and that's very abnormal. And so it does kind of like make a point, because I remember about like page 270 and there's like 300 pages, they kind of started talking about the potato barn, and I was like, I bet the next 30 pages are just like kind of how that gets revealed and all that stuff. And it was kind of just like, just telling the story.
I have a quandary.
A quandary.
Because there was one moment,
Not a question,
literally one sentence in this last, like the last 10, 15 pages or whatever, that made me question some of the sincerity. I don't know. I want to know what everybody else thought of this.
What sentence? I'm now so interested.
I know. So
Tell
like
us.
he's describing, because we talked about how like in the painting in the potato barn, he has a story for every single person that's there, and it's all very sincere and lovely and wonderful. And there's one moment where he's talking to Cersei. She's asking about like specific people, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that lady is a gypsy. She was like the queen of the gypsies." And he goes on this long story, and then after finishing up that whole story, he says, "Such was the story I made up for Cersei Berman." And the word "made up" there, and then he just moves on from that. I'm like, is it not real? Like, I
just think it's like, here's my thought, because I remember that, and I took it a different way in the sense of like I think he, like some of the people, I think he just made up stories for, because I don't think he knew every 1,000 person story, but I think in the same way that Dan Gregory was like, you need to know everything for everything in your paintings. I think in like a non-sincere way, he was just choosing to be like, cool, I'm actively thinking about like how this person's face would look because their background is like, you know, this made up thing that they did in their childhood or whatever. That's kind of what I took it as. I get what you're saying though.
Because he'd have to make up stories for every single person anyway. But I think that part of it is like, it's alluded to that he has the ability to do that for every single person on there. Like not something that is really baseline. Like, you know, he gets deep into a backstory of a random person.
He did, for multiple of them.
And then it goes into that in like little bite-sized pieces of other people when he's talking about how he describes it for Cersei for anybody else that she points out. So I kind of agree with that, and I can see how it can be taken either way, I suppose. But I more ascribe to that, I think.
Yeah. I just think that when I read it, I got really confused,
and
I was like, that seems weirdly cynical.
I read, like, I feel like I read all of the descriptions, and then he said, such was the story I made up for Cersei Roman, and I was like, did he just make all this shit up?
Like, yeah,
like, was he just like fucking around?
Yeah,
like,
I don't understand.
Like this whole time and like taking her for a ride, kind of.
Well, to be fair on the sincerity, I'm not saying it in the sense that like Raybo is like a completely pure and changed man. It's just like the sincerity of the story is just like he's still a flawed person, but like sincere in his like wanting to be better, and like the progression of a lot of other characters. I think that it doesn't mean that everything, like, even though it felt like a bow ending, it didn't mean that like Raybo necessarily is the best person on Earth. But I think that there was
because I still think
because he's
like,
not.
I didn't think that.
I still thought that Raybo at worst was a realist, and that's probably because I'm a cynic. But I do think that at worst Raybo was
a deep
like
dive
at the
there,
beginning
Andrew.
it seemed like he was like, this woman asked me to write a book about myself, and really there's nothing to be said, but I'll say it.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of what it seemed like. So
like,
I don't think. Yeah, I think I'm with you. Like I don't think Vonnegut was trying to be like, and then he became
the best.
The
Jesus
human.
Christ.
But I do think it was more just like he was
the best Jesus.
The best Jesus, not just Jesus, the best Jesus. But I do think that like, if you take that realism that he had and just take it into the second half, it's kind of like he was a realist throughout, in my opinion, because he was being told like, you're shit. I burnt your painting because it was trash. You know, like all this stuff. Like, I don't want to be with you because you're terrible, and I'm going to divorce you and leave you, and like all this stuff. And then in the later half, he got some bit of encouragement from someone who actually he felt like knew him, and he was like, okay, cool.
He bought it.
I can do that. Yeah, he bought it. Yeah.
A pessimist realist to an optimist realist or something.
And then a drug addict was like, yo, nice painting. And he was like, all right, I'm good.
Nice.
But no, I don't mean to discount her. But, you know, I just did.
No, this is a feminist book, Andrew. Excuse me.
One thing I want to touch on also is we talked about the title of the book itself, Bluebeard. Mm-hmm. So how do you think that plays into it now that we know what's in the secret room?
I mean, there are dead people in the room.
I guess that's true.
Okay, yeah.
There are dead people in the room.
Okay.
Does he have to kill anyone else? He has to kill his pessimist past, maybe.
There's definitely
the metaphors are flowing.
There's a lot of metaphors. There are hella metaphorical people that are dead, but also, they're painted dead people.
Yeah.
The gypsy's dead.
Mm-hmm.
Gypsy's dead.
There's not a single potato.
He
painted
He painted pictures of his dead friends, like Kitchen and Pollock.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, there's dead people.
I'm just curious on, like, just how it changed it. Because, like, that, you know, obviously it was a heavy-handed thing of Vonnegut to, like, mention this folk tale within and be like, it was a mass murder, like, cycle.
I guess I'm more trying to decide if it was a purposeful red herring or not, or if we just read into it a little too hard. Because I did, personally. I will say that I did read into it too hard. Like, the specific Bluebeard that he chose that story and how Bluebeard was a negative...
I mean, I think that I feel like it has to be purposeful because it's the title.
Right.
Of
It's
the book.
the title.
Right.
I'm
just meaning like. I'm just meaning like.
It's the title.
I mean, like, not because you could say that it's the title because of the dead people that are in the painting. Haha, look at that. But I think like the fact that it was like a negative story.
Like Bluebeard's a bad person.
Yeah, because obviously you could just take it as, you know, Bluebeard, dead people, and then you're like, oh, okay, there were dead people in there because in the painting. But I think it was kind of on purpose to make you, I don't know, just like question him potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think that also like the first half of the book, like we talked about Raybo, like he's not the worst person, but I definitely didn't think he was a good person.
No.
I still don't know that I think he's a good person. Like, And so but I definitely think the first half of the novel, with him talking about Bluebeard, it did seem a lot more like sinister. I was like, oh,
it
God.
kind of did.
This guy, like,
well, it made me like literally take it a little literally and like question it. Like he keeps talking about his 2 ex-wives. Like, are they in the potato barn?
But he did promise us at the beginning that there were no dead people in
right,
there.
but I also
or no bodies.
Something about bodies. Yeah, I don't know.
Because there are dead people.
Right.
Yeah, I just think
I don't know whether to trust him.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like that all makes sense on the readings into it. I did like it as far as the title and the explanation into it, that it did create an extra heightened sense of anticipation for what was going to be in there because of how much of a catharsis it was to get to that point. Because I think that wouldn't have been as big of a reveal had we not had that baseline to start that narrative arc of him being like talking about what's locked in this barn, him saying like the basis in this Bluebeard folktale, and then it like builds to that release. Because otherwise it's just like it's a guy that's a little shy. Yeah. But then otherwise we're like heightening this sense of anticipation of like, is somebody dead?
Yeah. And I think it's like,
what did you do?
I think that's partially not partially. I just think that is intentional in the sense of just like trying to convey the emotional sincerity of why he like locked it up and never opened it again. Because it's one thing if he was talking about like, I have this one room I don't let anyone go into and like I don't really talk about it or whatever, but it's completely different to be like, I have a potato barn that's separate that I've locked up and nobody's ever going in there. And I think it was just definitely to show like how much he, because of his past and because of all these things, you can see how much he was so scared to just like really show people his one last shot at like, can I have soul? Can I have?
It's really vulnerable.
Yeah, and so I think, maybe that's why the Bluebeardian analogy was made.
Yeah,
Bluebeardian. But I don't know.
Yeah. And so with that, then I think we can kind of get into final thoughts here. One thing that I want to touch on for everybody is how this. First of all, as we've done in previous episodes of the second half of books, on how you thought the second half compared to the first half. Also in this case, because we have the context, how do you feel that this ranks amongst your Vonnegut readings? You know, just kind of comparing it to what you've read and how that kind of changes your perception on his body of work overall, and then just any other final thoughts you may have.
I'll start. I think my second favorite, or actually I think my favorite Vonnegut going into this was Cat's Cradle because of its themes. Like I love
classic.
Yeah, it is.
It's so good.
No doubt. And the themes there were just really nice for me. I liked them a whole lot because of its cynicism and because of its like nihilistic kind of views, and I hella needed that when I was reading that book, so it felt really good. Absolutely. And I was like, yeah, give me it. I want the nihilism, you know?
Yeah.
And that, I thought that the tone there was also like, it was someone who was obviously very thoughtful as compared to someone who's like a slapstick narrator, a jailbird narrator that's a little bit just, they don't talk about how they're like the most thoughtful person, or it doesn't seem like they're really, you know, looking into a lot of stuff, whereas, you know, the Cat's Cradle narrator certainly was. And in this one I saw the same thing, but in obviously the opposite way. Like I didn't feel like it was nihilism. I felt like it was like, find your way to cope, find your way to heal, all that kind of stuff. So I think this might, I'd have to think about it. I don't know if I like it as much as Cat's Cradle because I really still like that one, but it's got to be like second or third. Like even in terms of like the last 40 pages and how he delivers that, it's great. And how it all just comes to a head. And even like his concession as a narrator is rare. I feel like in other books, like if a narrator ever gets like put in the corner, he kind of has like a witty way to be like, well, screw you. Like this cynical like witticism that makes you look dumb or whatever. But in this one, Merrily was like, here's all these terrible things. And it kind of seemed like to an extent he was like, man, you're right. And just like in his, like in the rest of the novel, it seemed like he took it to heart too, because now he painted, you know, this final painting. So I liked it a lot. I liked it a lot. I would say probably second or third favorite.
Cool.
I think I told Jamie and Brian this earlier. I think this is my favorite Vonnegut book that I read. This is my fourth. And I think it's my favorite one.
And back to the backstories, you don't always like Vonnegut stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I was going to say, I don't know what that says about like my taste and Vonnegut, because we all just spent 30 minutes talking about how this is like a little out of style for him a little bit. But yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I feel like I appreciated the sincerity, and like maybe, I don't know, the lack of so much cynicism that I feel like other books of his that I've read have. And I definitely, I mean, I don't know if we're comparing first and second half, like in terms of how much we like them, but I really liked the second half. I feel like I was much more engaged, and I like the way that I was like satisfied with the way that he wrapped everything up. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, as far as the first and second half, as we kind of touched on earlier, I thought that, again, it was so cool to see him build up to such a peak for a theme that didn't seem as present in the first half, that he was able to do that in the back half. And that's why I like doing these podcasts in 2 parts, because we've had that with other books that we've done. I think we mentioned it during our episodes with 100 Years of Solitude, where it really felt like the book was meant to be read in 2 parts like that, even though it wasn't split like that. And not every book is like that, but obviously a halfway point is going to bring some point where it has to wrap back up. But I thought that it really did feel like the back half had some other themes to explore, and those themes were really rich and deep, that it was worth diving into and analyzing a bit more. And as far as the book itself, this is something that I've talked about with Jamie, because there's not a ton of authors that I've read like multiple books of theirs, but there are certain instances now where I'm starting to analyze like Kurt Vonnegut's works with how much I like certain characters separated from certain stories. And different instances, like I really liked Mr. Rosewater and God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater as a character, but that book might not be my favorite of all of his work. But it was so interesting in that case that Mr. Rosewater was kind of a caricature of a character, because he was kind of out there even in his pure sincerity for trying to help people, even as absurd as it was that it wasn't necessarily helping himself. But in this case, I really liked Raybo as a character because he didn't feel as absurd as some of the other characters in Vonnegut's novels, where you get into Slaughterhouse-Five, you have Billy Pilgrim, and he's just kind of an absurd caricature, but it works in that story, and the story's still amazing. And again, it's kind of a flip-flop where the story's amazing, but maybe Billy Pilgrim isn't my favorite character of all time within Kurt Vonnegut stuff. But Raybo was so three-dimensional, and his ability to concede his faults, even at the expense of making himself look bad. Because that's the thing, is like when we're talking about all these things that we're saying Raybo may not be a perfect character, this is all from his point of view anyway, so all of that is his own doing, and he's not doing it where he's there's other stories where characters happen to let out the terrible things that they've done seemingly by accident, and they don't realize how terrible it is. Like in his case, he just was very upfront with it and was like, these things suck. Like I suck sometimes, but like here's also my story and here's how it concludes. And it's very satisfying. And I really, really, really liked Bluebeard a lot. And I thought that I wish more people would read it, because it's surprising to see like on Goodreads, it's one of the less popular as far as number of ratings. It's one of the less popular Vonnegut books, but like you said, Andrew, I don't think it should be a first book of anybody, but I would say if you like Kurt Vonnegut's stuff, it's definitely worth visiting. So
I feel like Raybo is one of the most more dynamic characters that I've ever read from Vonnegut.
Yeah. I have similar feelings. I think first half versus second half, I definitely enjoyed the second half a lot. Like, I loved the first half also. I love Vonnegut. There was never a moment where I was like, oh, I have to read this. But the second half, I was like very immersed in Marilee's story in particular. Like I said, I think she's great. And I love the sincerity of Raybo in the second half. And I wonder, we didn't really talk about this, but I have a feeling that because this is like a later book in Vonnegut's career, it probably had something to do with him being like an older man and being maybe less cynical about the world and maybe more like okay, like I did good things, maybe. Like
kind of matter of fact about the bad things.
Yeah.
And like that it wasn't like,
which I think is nice. As far as it compares to other Vonnegut's, prior to reading this, I think my top 3 Vonnegut books would have been Cat's Cradle, Slaughterhouse-Five, and Mother Night.
Wait, say those again.
Cat's Cradle, Slaughterhouse-Five, Mother Night.
Okay.
Those are all the ones I've read.
Oh, nice. There we go. Wonder why.
I think those would be my top 3.
We figured it out.
It hasn't been long enough for me to like officially place this anywhere.
Yeah.
But I think it's in there
Update
somewhere.
us on the rankings,
Ooh.
please.
Live.
I feel like Mother Night might get pushed down a little bit.
But that's the thing. I love Mother Night. And
Mother Night's great.
Cat's Cradle, like for sure, Cat's Cradle will always be my favorite. I don't think that anything's
Yeah.
going to surpass
Yeah,
that
Cat's
for me.
Cradle. Sorry, Danny.
Hell
Did we
yeah.
talk about that?
Cat's Cradle is incredible.
It's so good. And like Slaughterhouse-Five is important in so many ways. And so part of me,
Right.
like, I feel like I would be betraying part of who I am by saying that I liked this better than Slaughterhouse-Five.
Right. Because that's the one that's like all encompassing.
Jamie's experiencing a crisis.
I know, yeah. She's really
front of
conflicted
our
here.
faces.
But maybe,
Show us your potato buns.
Oh, baby, show me your
potato
potato
bun.
bun.
Wow. So it's in there.
Wow.
It's in the mix. I'll just start talking about my top 4 Vonnegut books.
Yeah, there you
instead of my top 3.
Yeah.
Just expand the
Make
list
my list
rather
a
than.
little weirder, but
Yeah.
you know.
Those are my thoughts.
Cool. Well, that was strange. No, that was a really good couple of episodes. I enjoyed talking about Bluebeard quite a bit.
Yeah,
Thank
me
you,
too.
Andrew, for
Yeah,
joining us.
Thank you guys for having me. This was
Yeah.
a real treat.
Yeah,
need
it
to
was
I
come
fun.
loved
back.
it. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah.
I'd love to. I read books.
And so, talking about coming back
yeah.
and the continuation of the podcast, we brought this up at the end of last week. I think it's just good house cleaning to make sure that we bring it up again for any loyal listeners of what we're going to be
hanging on our every word.
Yeah, right. Of what we're going to be reading next. And also, we do have a special announcement for Jamie's, so that's kind of fun. But as far as
Hopefully it stays true.
yeah, hopefully it stays true. It's going to be on the pod, so we'll see. So as far as the ordering of the books going forward, we're going to go back to the 3 of the OG hosts are going to each have a book, and it's going to be in the same order.
Thanks.
Andrew's getting the middle
Get a
finger
lot
all
of
around the
flip
table.
A lot of flip-offs.
So as we did previously, it's going to be me, and then Jamie, and then Danny. And so for my book, we're doing Vineland by Thomas Pynchon.
My book is Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, and hopefully we've gotten some confirmation from a new special guest
We won't say the name just in case.
who would like to join us for Underground Railroad. I won't say her name, but she's a coworker of mine.
Yeah. So that'll be another English teacher on the pod.
Yeah, English teachers on the pod. English teachers on the pod.
My choice for this round is Northwest by Zadie Smith.
Cool. So that will be the order of what we're going to be doing going forward. There was talks about what we're going to do. Since we've kind of talked about this in 7 episodes, Danny, we're kind of throwing this at you live.
Live on the pod.
So you had said that you would want to continue on after the 7 that we had originally talked about. So say we do this in seasons, and this is the first season after 7, so we have a wrap-up episode after the last book. Talk about favorite drinks, which would be interesting. I'll bring the list. I'll give you a list.
Wine and LaCroix.
and then
What'd you like most?
and then a ranking of the books would be interesting as well, and then just kind of shoot the shit.
That sounds super fun. I would love to do that.
Cool.
When you guys pitched this idea to me, I was planning on doing this for the rest of my life.
That's my life. So yeah, we'll just do it in seasons.
So
We'll just
I
do it in
wasn't
seasons.
expecting to stop
we need
this
to have,
ever.
like a hiatus moment where it's like, okay, end of season 1.
Yeah.
We could take a little
I think that'll help it
break.
Yeah.
too. So yeah,
Yeah,
I guess.
I guess.
I suppose.
So this is the mid-season finale. So Andrew, you were
There we
the special guest that
Hell
brought in the heat
yeah.
halfway, and then we'll
You're
be.
our first special guest.
That's
Morale
true.
booster.
That's
You're
true.
welcome. Thank you for guesting me.
And so
Such a guest.
And so we'll be wrapping up the back half of season 1 and then have a wrap-up episode as well. Maybe a call-in.
Give me on speakerphone.
What was your favorite?
I loved all the weed beer, bro. Hell yeah.
What was your favorite weed beer?
Those 2 weird beers I drank. So good.
Weird beer.
So high.
So hot, bro.
So I think that'll be it for our discussion on Bluebeard, and we're gonna need, because we don't know the next time we'll see you. We're gonna need another scat outro from our guest Andrew.
Skibbity scat, scabbity skoo, skibbity scabbity.
That was beautiful.
Simple.
We'll rate that on the wrap-up episode.
Best scat.
We will catch you next time.